Welcome to our webinar today, How to Establish Yourself as an Expert by Spence Smith of Spencer X. Smith Consulting. My name is Ryan Kauf and I will be your host today. I direct the Wisconsin Small Business Development Center, or SBDC, at UW Green Bay. The Wisconsin SBDC at UW Green Bay is part of a statewide network and national America's SBDC network, supporting entrepreneurs and their business owners through no-cost, confidential business advising and targeted educational programs. Regional SBDC experts facilitate improvement and growth for small and emerging mid-sized companies and help launch successful new enterprises. The no-cost business planning and low-cost leadership development training at the Wisconsin SBDC at UW Green Bay is funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration, or SBA. Our website is uwgb.edu/SBDC. Today we continue our 2015 monthly no-cost 30-minute topical webinar series designed for the success of small business owners and their executive team members. At the conclusion of this webinar, we will share the upcoming webinar topics, and we encourage you to consider registering for those. We thank Mickey Noon and Tim Bino from First Business Bank for their partnership in promoting these monthly webinars and for their dedication to small business success. We also thank Michael Wentworth and his company TMR Associates, the B2B appointment setting company providing qualified leads and market insights, for their partnership in developing these webinars. After the webinar, you will be emailed a link to a recording of this webinar. During the webinar, you are invited to ask questions at any time. Please use the menu along the right side of your screen indicated here in the red circle. Type your question and hit enter. As soon as I see it, I will make note of it for the presenter to address toward the end of our webinar. And now I'd like to turn it over to our expert presenter this month, Spence Smith of Spencer X. Smith Consulting. Spence?
All right, Ryan, thank you so much for the kind introduction as always. So everybody should be seeing my screen as of right about now, and you'll see the presentation here. So on the cover here of the first slide, you'll see the cover to my ebook that I give away for free on my website that will cover all the topics we're talking about today and more at spencerxsmith.com. If you'd like to reach me, the best way, probably the quickest way I can get back to you is by using my Twitter handle, which is SpencerXSays. So as Ryan said, today's topic is how to establish yourself as an expert, and we'll go through this in 3 steps. Step number 1, please don't declare yourself one. Allow others to come to that determination on their own. Number 2, teach what you know in simple terms. This will be the vast majority of what we talk about today. And lastly, once we take time to describe things in simple terms, how do we go about sharing our knowledge? So how do we get people to find us? So when we're done, you'll know these 3 things, and I call each of them the Summerfest effect, teaching-based marketing, and the cascading content strategy. So number 1 is the Summerfest effect, and this was derived from when I used to play in a rock band. And the very bottom of this pyramid, you'll see everybody in the world that has joined a band. At the top of the pyramid is where it gets very exclusive, and that's where you've actually played at Summerfest. So everything in between on this pyramid is levels. So as you progress upward, it gets more and more rare as to who's actually done these things. So once again, down to the very bottom section, you'll see join a band. After that point, after you get 4 or 5 people together and they actually show up and start practicing, you go out first and you perform for a crowd. As of that point then, if you figure out that you're doing that pretty well and it's a comfortable thing for you to do, you consider writing a song. And a lot of people ask me, well, don't you write a song and then perform for a crowd? And typically that doesn't actually happen. Most people, when they initially start playing in front of a crowd, they'll perform other people's songs. And the reason is to figure out, are we going to get stage fright? Are we going to do this successfully? After you have an opportunity to do that well, though, then you might consider writing a song. There's a huge demarcation, though, between these 2 sections. So those who perform for a crowd and those who write for a song. So if you think about any bands that you've ever seen that maybe play the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, those are considered cover bands, so they're playing other people's songs. After you progress beyond that point and you write your own song, it's a little more intimidating because you're really putting yourself out there. You're not playing music that people have already heard before. So in the context of social media, this applies from the standpoint of when you perform for a crowd, you're curating other people's stuff. When you write a song, you're actually creating your own content. And as I said, there's a huge delineation between those two. Once you start writing your own songs, though, that's how you progress up the rest of the pyramid and you can perform for Summerfest. So once you start creating your own content, your original content for your website and other social media platforms, that's where you'll start to be seen as an expert. The second topic we'll cover is what I call teaching-based marketing. And here's a picture of me doing exactly that. So here's a question. Have you ever researched something online before you bought it? And the answer is, well, of course, we all have. The internet didn't miss any of us, nor any of our businesses. So as a result, expectations have drastically changed. Every consumer that's out there, whether it be us personally or those to whom we're trying to sell, have a lot more information now. And they know things that we never would have known before in a sales situation. So they're doing all of their research ahead of time. Here's some data to back up that idea. Google and the Corporate Executive Board polled 1,500 purchasers from business-to-business purchasing departments, and they said, you know, before you go out to the marketplace, before you engage with the possible vendors from whom you're going to choose, how much research are you actually doing ahead of time? And the respondents said 57%. Actually, Harvard Business Review picked up this article about 3 months ago or so, and they upped this to 60%. So if Harvard says 60, then I guess I'll say 60 also. But what this tells us is that before anybody is calling you, they're doing all of their research ahead of time, at least 2/3 or so of it. So if you think about this then, isn't it just your web presence that's that liaison for you? Aren't people doing all the research on the web? And the answer is of course, right? So is your web presence simply just an advertisement? Is it simply just a trifold brochure in electronic form talking all about you? And to go a step further, isn't your web presence really an extension of you? So your web presence meaning your website and LinkedIn profile, Facebook business profile, those kind of things. So as an example, if you were to hear me today on this webinar and all I do is try to sell stuff to you, you probably wouldn't want to engage with me on my website or download my book or engage with me on Twitter. And if you think about your website and if all it's doing right now is trying to sell things, do you think your customers are going to try to engage with you personally if they're trying to do research first? And the answer to that is probably no. So this may have been a grandiose statement 3 or 5 years ago, certainly, but isn't your web presence really who you are? So how do we remedy that? Well, we take all of these things that are in your head and we share those. We share those in digital form, so on your website and other electronic mechanisms that we'll use, and I'll go through that now for you. So the first step is think like your audience. Don't think like you as the business owner and what makes you so great. Think how your audience would want to be trained before they engage with you as your customer. Because the typical website now will say, hey, here's everything about our company. Here's who works here. Here's what we do. Here's why we're better than our competitors. But your audience initially is coming to your website to learn from you, to get educated before they make the buying decision. So think like your audience as you develop your content. So that being said, where does your audience go to get answers to questions? And of course, Google, right? Well, how many answers does Google actually provide to questions on a daily basis? And the answer actually now is 3.5 billion, so it's gone up since I've created this slide. But what's important about this statistic is people trust Google. We don't look up something on Google and have to go back and validate if it's true. We just accept it as the truth. So how does Google really work? Well, in the next 3 or so minutes, you'll learn how Google works and the only search engine optimization advice you really need for your business. So what is SEO? Well, SEO, if you think about you on one hand as your business and your customers on the other hand, SEO and Google and other search engines are that conduit by which customers find you. So step one to utilizing this conduit, utilizing this facilitation tool, is if it's not written on your website, it doesn't exist. So any of you who know any doctors, in the medical field, there's a saying that says, if it's not written down, it never happened. Well, if it's not written on your website, it doesn't exist. So what we need you to do is state exactly what you know on your website, because Google doesn't know what you do unless you specifically tell it. So here's an example of that. The most popular how-to Google search every single year is how to tie a tie. So let's say you and I run a tie shop. And we have a pretty typical website. On it, it says, we sell ties. We sell striped ties and dotted ties and colored ties and bow ties and all kinds of stuff. But here's a question. Do you know how to tie a tie? And the answer as a tie shop is, well, of course we know how to tie a tie. But you know what? The Google computers don't know that, because Google can't infer from a fact that we sell ties that you know how to tie a tie, because we're not answering that question on our website. So said another way, Google can't read your mind. It can't take all the things that you've learned in all of your years in business and infer what it is that you know as a result of your products or services. So as boring as this seems, we really need to create content about the very, very basics that your customers are asking you in person and doing research for online without ever calling you. As another example, let's say you run a law firm, and let's say you do wills and trusts and estates and all that kind of stuff. Well, here are the top 5 will-related Google search queries. What does a will look like? Do, cost, mean, consist of? Well, let's say you're an attorney and you specialize in doing wills, or your law firm does a ton of estate planning. Do you know the answers to these questions? Well, of course, that's your job, right? Well, I'm sorry, Google doesn't know that. We need to write those articles. So timeless search engine optimization, timeless SEO, simply consists of answering customers' questions. So here's what I always hear from people that I talk to. Well, what do you write and produce content about? That's exactly what we do. We listen to our customers and we write the answers to their questions. So I propose, if you think every Friday afternoon, what did I hear more than once this week from clients, potential customers? What did I answer more than once this week on the phone or in person or via email? And we turn those into articles that appear on our website, so when Google goes out to search for answers to those questions, it finds your website. So people always have apprehension, though, when it comes to writing your own song, so to speak. Well, let me just assuage those concerns a little bit. Here's a stat. How many hours of video are uploaded every single minute to YouTube? And the answer is 300. So 300 hours every single minute of new video are uploaded to YouTube. So let's say you create your first video, as an example, and it stinks. Well, don't worry. No one will ever see it. It's hard enough to get people to watch great videos. Your video that maybe doesn't go so well the first time, no one will see it. What's very important about this, though, regardless of the mechanism that you use, whether it's video or audio or written text, you're going to get better at this stuff. You're going to find that voice that's most comfortable for you, and as you refine that process, you're going to get much better at doing this. Here's my favorite quote of all time, because it talks to all of us. In my walks, every man I meet is my superior in some way, and in that I learn from him. So what does this quote mean? Well, it means that every single person has something to offer us. Every single person has expertise that we don't. But this webinar today is not about other people. This is about you. So if we take this quote just a little bit and turn it on its head, what it tells us is that every person can learn from you as well. By way of doing what you do 40 plus hours a week at your job, you are an expert in what it is that you do, and all we need to do is share that with others. So Dr. Einstein said that everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And that's the idea that we should apply when it comes to taking these topics that you know so well as an expert in your business and distill it down into something easy for others to understand. Because we don't need to impress your peers. Now, typically, the more advanced you are in your job or the longer you've been in school, the harder this gets for you. You're used to writing at a certain level to impress people in your peer group or maybe a journal that you're writing for. Well, we need to start writing for our customers and our clients so they can learn from us and find you online. This is what I call the virtuous cycle of becoming an effective teacher. And this is the way that we can then accurately distill things down to make them easy for others to understand. So in the upper left, what you're going to see is where we all start with really any topic, and that's that you're a novice. And our biggest problem is at that point is an overall lack of knowledge. So our big job there is to simply familiarize ourselves with concepts and verbiage. If you move to the upper right quadrant then, at that point, we've internalized a lot of the core concepts, a lot of the basic ideas, but then we're also, if you've heard the expression, enough to be dangerous. So at that point, we don't know what we don't know. So in the bottom right is probably the most problematic quadrant. So what I mean by that is at that point, we've taken everything that we know and organized it into a logical sequence that makes sense to us. But then we have what's called the curse of knowledge, meaning we know something so well, it's really hard to break it down into the very basics. So once we progress to the bottom left quadrant and we simplify everything so others can learn from us, that's where this becomes a circle. So at that point, we're then not speaking to anybody, we're speaking to everybody because they're asking us those same questions all the time, and we're then answering their questions that they have, simply so they can walk away feeling smarter as a result of what we said. The last topic I'll cover today then is the cascading content strategy. And what this covers is a question that I always hear, which is, what should I be sharing on social media once I've developed these great ideas? And usually when people ask these questions, they start down on step 3, where I have it indicated that social shares or social media to educate potential customers. They try to skip there. And if we back up just 2 steps, this is where this is going to work really, really well. And I call this cascading content because if you think about, as an example, snow going down the side of a mountain, that cascade idea where momentum picks up, that's what we do once we have a well-crafted, well-articulated article. That's what we do in step 1. We think about what questions are we hearing, what answers are we providing to our customers. So as I said, every Friday afternoon, consider doing this. Check your sent items in your email because you've probably written the same email a half dozen times, if not more. Take that and make that an article and use that instead of sending the same email every time. Once we get to that point then of having a great answer to a question that we hear, we proceed to step 2. So whether we do a webinar like this one, or whether we do an audio recording or a video recording, certainly this article becomes the script for those things. So if I'm one of your customers and I'd prefer to learn from you in a different method, I can do that. So I can read it, or I can watch it in a video format, or I can hear it in audio format, or whatever you'd like. Then, by the time we get down to step 3, the question of, well, what do we share on social media? We've already created this great stuff, and you've set it different ways for different audiences, and you can share it out multiple times. It's not just something you put out there once, because the way the algorithms work with all the social media outlets, only a small percentage see what you put out there anyway. As we move down to step 4 then, the email newsletter that you send out, well, what do we put in that? Well, once again, we put in those great articles and those videos that you've already created. By the time we get down to step 5, I call this a digital asset. so your ebooks and the webinars that you do, this stuff, all of these 4 steps, that's what builds out this digital asset. So at this point, when we give something away of tremendous value, like a webinar, like an ebook, people will exchange their email in trade for that. At that point, then, we have permission to speak to these customers and potential customers on an ongoing basis. That's the idea of the cascading content strategy. Create something once, let it work in many, many different ways, and repurpose that idea. So before we go on to the questions, the last thing I want to touch on is you ask, well, with step 1, how do I get this stuff out of my head? Because maybe I'm not a natural writer. Well, here are 2 other options for you. I call this the 3 styles of subject matter experts. One is the author, and that is a natural writer. Maybe you keep journals or diaries, or you just really like to write. Well, how about those that just like to talk? How about those that are really comfortable talking? Well, I call you the talk show host. So get yourself a microphone and just start answering your customers' questions that way. Another option there is to get a Google Voice account. It's free, and it'll transcribe the voicemails you leave for yourself. So you get out of a meeting with a client, as an example, or a potential customer, and you take 2 minutes and distill that down into what questions do people have, how did I answer those questions, and what happened. So Google Voice will actually write that article for you by way of transcription. The last subject matter expert is the movie star. And you can probably guess who I'm talking about here. It's all the salespeople out there, right? You bring in a video camera and they say, hey, I'll be on film, that's no problem. So they can then speak just like they talk to clients or just like they talk to the press or TV or whatever it might be, and we get their ideas out of their head that way. So regardless of the method that you use, everything will be then written for you. Once again, if you'd like more information about these topics and more, go out to spencerxsmith.com and download my free book. I will turn it over to Ryan for any questions.
Spencer, thank you so much for sharing all that great information. The first question that came in, it might have been earlier on or before you got to that cascading content slide or before the effective teacher slide, but really it's, how do I start? And looks like you gave us, 3 options, being the author, talk show host, and the movie star. But I guess the people that you coach and you consult with, how do they start usually?
Yeah, usually, it's a really good question, Ryan. Usually we check their sent items in their email because that's something that they've already written down, and as opposed to staring at a blank screen, we can ask, well, what questions are you typically answering on behalf of your clients on a weekly basis? And we'll search your sent items and we'll actually find that you've written that stuff already, and we just need to take out the stuff that is specific to a certain individual and make it more general, and that usually creates our first 15 to 20 articles right there.
Fantastic, great tip. Great tip on the Google Voice thing as well. And I like how you really have to get to know your customers using this method. Another question that has come in is more about video probably than anything else as an option. It's about professional video versus, video on your cell phone and things like that. What have you seen used, Spence, that is probably the most effective there?
Yeah, it really, really depends on your audience, and I know I don't want to I don't want to skirt the answer to that, but it depends drastically on who you're trying to reach. And I think there was a big change, maybe whenever the Ice Bucket Challenge was 18 months ago or so, when the quality of the video wasn't quite as important as the message. And now if you're in a professional situation, or maybe you have a really great factory that you're running or something where you want high quality video, it probably makes sense to do that. But the first thing I try, since we all pretty much have video on our cell phones, is either record you or record the person that's going to be on video along with what it is that you're trying to portray, and get comfortable with it first, because that's going to be free. And you know what? It might be really good. So it's just something that we need to practice first and just try to get it out there initially.
Another question that came through, Spence, is about working with your employees to create that content. What are some of the strategies that you've used when you're consulting and coaching people for these things?
Oh, this is the best stuff. When we get employees on board, they love it. And this is not to get too deep into this idea, but everything with digital marketing has data points, meaning if we, back in the day, put up a billboard on a highway or maybe ran a radio ad, we really had no way of measuring that stuff. But now with digital marketing, everything has data points. And so more often than not, if we can get employees to buy into this idea of everybody there at your company is an expert because they're interacting with customers or they're interacting with vendors or they're answering questions all the time in the field, make it known that, hey, we're going to take your experiences, we're going to write answers to those questions, and we're going to measure it. And so we're going to put it in the break room or maybe share it on our intranet site and let you know, hey, we published these 2 articles, let's see who wins. And we get to do more of that stuff. So employees love this because they really feel like they're not only valued in this capacity, but they actually get to see what happens. So one strategy right off the bat that I've seen be very effective with this idea is any of your employees that are answering customers' questions on a regular basis, where it's that same question that keeps coming up, have them blind carbon copy an email box that you create called content or blog or whatever, so you can start building out that repository. So they're essentially writing the articles for you, and then whoever is handling your marketing can make sure that we put those out on a systematic basis.
Spence, thank you so much. We're out of time for today, but really great information, and I would encourage everyone on the webinar to go to Spence's site there and download that free tool from him. So Spence, thank you again.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, coming up, our next webinar features Carrie Chochette of Purple Squirrel Advisors, and she will present how to hire leaders who have it all. In July, George Bureau will present how to focus on your customers to grow your business. Then in August, we'll learn secrets to successful and simple employee development. And in September, how to manage your banking relationship and not be managed by it. In October, how your workflow improves your bottom line. In November, how to harvest maximum value from your business. And finally, in December, we will wrap up with, here he is, Don, how to use benchmarking to increase your business value. You can register for our on-site workshops, our virtual certificate programs, and all upcoming no-cost webinars at uwgb.edu/SBDC. We also have several past webinar recordings there on sales, marketing, business ownership, and leadership. In closing, I would very much like to thank Spence Smith of Spencer X Smith Consulting. Spence, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Mickey and Tim at First Business Bank, and Michael Wentworth of TMR Associates. And thank you all for attending. Now, go establish yourself as an expert. This concludes our webinar. Goodbye.